Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Picture a smoke-filled lounge in West Berlin, 1954. In one corner, a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist argues over the merits of the New Left with a French philosopher. In another, a high-ranking diplomat's wife laughs at a joke told by a charming American cultural attaché. On the walls hang canvases of splattered, chaotic ink, art that seems to stand for nothing, yet represents everything. This is the front line of the Cold War. There are no trenches here, only galleries, no bayonets, only ballet. Beyond the missiles and the spies, the CIA discovered a new battlefield. The hearts and minds of the world's elite. We'll uncover the sophisticated manipulation of AEJIG, the secret project that turned cultural festivals, international sports, and high art exhibitions into hunting grounds for intelligence recruitment. It's a story of cultural infiltration and social engineering in the most unlikely of places. To understand AEJIG, you have to look at the world of the 1950s and 60s through the lens of ideological containment. The Soviet Union was winning the propaganda war by claiming that American culture was a hollow commercial wasteland. To counter this, the agency decided to prove that the West was the true home of intellectual and artistic freedom. But they couldn't do it openly. If the world knew the US government was paying for modern art, the freedom would look like a script. The centerpiece of AEJIG was the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Established in Paris in 1950, it operated offices in 35 countries, published dozens of highbrow literary magazines like Encounter, and organized massive international conferences. It looked like a grassroots movement of the world's greatest thinkers. In reality, every cent came from the CIA through pass-through foundations like the Fairfield Foundation. But it wasn't just words. The agency became the silent patron of abstract expressionism. Artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko, R-O-T-H-K-O, were championed globally by the CIA because their chaotic, non-figurative style was the perfect antithesis to the rigid socialist realism of the USSR. And it makes so much sense because I learned this just today, and all of my life I have never understood modern art, in particular Pollock. His work to me just appears to be paint splattered on a canvas. Anyway, the CIA didn't care if the art was good, clearly. They cared that it was free of recognizable messages, making it the ultimate symbol of Western liberty. The velvet glove of the agency didn't just appear, it was meticulously branded within the shadows of the classification ledger. The designation AEJIG follows the agency's standard cryptonym convention for the era. The AE diagraph was the geographic and functional code for operations targeting the Soviet Union and its satellite states through political and psychological means. The JIG suffix was the specific project identifier for the Cultural Fronts Division, a fittingly playful name for a project that required the agency to dance through the most prestigious salons of Europe and the Americans without ever stepping on a toe. We are pulling the mask off the gala. Here is the cold, hard inventory of the agency's cultural conquest. AEJIG funded the international touring of major American symphony orchestras to showcase Western excellence. The Congress for Cultural Freedom employed hundreds of writers and editors who had no idea their paychecks originated at Langley. Records show the CIA used AEJIG to influence the selection of certain pro-Western authors for the Nobel Prize in Literature, which is so interesting to me. The agency sponsored the masterpieces of the 20th Century Festival in Paris to celebrate art the Soviets had banned. Documentation confirms the CIA funded the publication and secret distribution of some of Boris Pasternak's work to undermine Soviet censorship. AEJIG used the Olympic Games as a high-priority environment for spotting and recruiting Soviet athletes looking to defect. The agency created the Boston Symphony Orchestra's 1956 tour of the Soviet Union as a psychological operation. The CIA purchased and distributed thousands of copies of George Orwell's classic Animal Farm to foreign audiences. AEJIG funded the publication of the literary magazine Der Monat, M-O-N-A-T, in West Germany to influence post-war intellectuals. The project utilized the MoMA in New York as a platform to launch traveling exhibitions of American art overseas. Documentation confirms the CIA funded the animated film version of Animal Farm to ensure the ending was sufficiently anti-communist. Records show AEJIG provided financial support for the Salzburg Festival to promote European high culture. The agency managed a secret translation bureau to ensure Western philosophy was available in over 30 languages. Internal audits reveal the CIA operated a network of propaganda safe houses in London disguised as literary salons. The project funded the creation of the African Cultural Society to counter Soviet influence in decolonizing nations. Records verify that AEJIG paid for the distribution of Western medical journals to Eastern Bloc doctors to prove technological superiority. The CIA funded the International Conference on Science and Freedom in Hamburg to recruit high-level physicists. Documentation shows that AEJIG influenced the programming of Venice Biennale during the 1950s, Biennale. The project utilized the Fulbright program as a cover for certain field agents. The CIA created the Radio Free Europe jazz programs to bypass the Iron Curtain. Records confirm that AEJIG sponsored a world tour for the Martha Graham Dance Company. The AEG maintained a blacklist of artists whose work was considered too sympathetic to the Soviet cause. The agency recruited gallery owners in Soho to report on the political leanings of visiting foreign dignitaries. Records show the CIA used AEJIG to distribute miniature copies of the U.S. Constitution at international trade fairs. The project funded anti-communist labor unions in Italy and France through cultural outreach programs. AEJIG provided the funding for the Dakar Festival in 1966, the Dakar Festival of Negro Arts in 1966. Documentation shows the agency used AEJIG to track the movements of the Soviets and their ballets. The project operated a secret printing press in West Berlin to produce high-quality cultural forgeries for the Eastern market. AEJIG funded the publication of the magazine Quadrant in Australia to secure the intellectual flank of the Pacific. Records show the CIA used cultural events to map the social networkings of high-ranking Soviet diplomats' wives. The project sponsored student art contests across Latin America to identify the future political leaders. Internal memos confirm that AEJIG used social climbing case officers to infiltrate the highest circles of British royalty. AEJIG funded the publication of Transition magazine in Uganda to shape the minds of the new African elite. The project provided the seed money for the World Music Council. Documentation confirms the CIA used AEJIG to recruit foreign film directors for educational documentary projects. Records verify that the agency used high society weddings in Washington, D.C. as AEJIG operational hubs. A quote from Tom Braden, former CIA International Organizations Division Chief. "We wanted to unite the people who were writers, who were musicians, who were artists, to demonstrate that the West and the United States were devoted to freedom of expression." A quote from a declassified internal CIA historical review. "In the field of cultural propaganda, the agency's greatest success was making the invisible hand of the state truly invisible." A quote from Donald Jameson, a CIA case officer. "We were the secret patrons of the avant-garde, bankrolling the very people who thought they were rebels against the system." And declassified CIA official memo. "If we could win the poets and the painters, the politicians would eventually follow." End quote. The most sensitive files of the AEJIG project remain heavily redacted under FOIA exemptions B1 and B6. While B1 covers national security and foreign policy, B6 is a strict firewall protecting personnel and medical files and similar files, the disclosure of which would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. What does this likely mean? These redactions almost certainly hide the recruitment logs of specific A-list Hollywood celebrities and world-renowned musicians who served as active spotters for the agency. My theory is that the CIA maintained a talent agency within the AEJIG framework that identified specific actors and directors who would use their international press tours to deliver coded messages or meet with foreign dissidents in off-the-record sessions. The privacy exemption is being used to protect the legacy of these cultural icons whose public personas and family estates would be destroyed if their status as active CIA assets was revealed. Specifically, these files likely contain the payback details, how the agency secured film roles or favorable reviews for stars who cooperated, effectively proving that the Hollywood hierarchy was partially a CIA construct. When the government funds the arts, every brushstroke is a potential secret. For instance, there is the idea of the engineered modernism. Some speculate that AEJIG didn't just fund modern art, but actually invented certain styles to be intentionally incomprehensible, ensuring that only the elite, who the CIA was targeting, could appreciate them, effectively creating a secret language of status. This would allow agents to identify like-minded intellectuals in a crowded room simply by observing their reaction to a specifically placed piece of trigger art. There's also the notion of the Olympic doping front. It's a theory that the CIA used AEJIG-funded sports clinics to test early performance-enhancing drugs on Western athletes to ensure they beat the Soviets, using the cultural excellence narrative to mask a biological arms race. This theory suggests that the agency viewed the human body as just another medium for showcasing Western superiority, regardless of the long-term health consequences for the athletes involved. And then there's the Hollywood script doctor. Speculation persists that the CIA had a creative review board under AEJIG that sat in on major studio pitch meetings, ensuring that global villains in cinema always shared the psychological traits of the agency's real-world targets. By subtly adjusting scripts, the CIA could condition the global public to associate specific accents or behaviors with the enemy years before real conflict ever broke out. And then, of course, there's a persistent theory which suggests that AEJIG-sponsored symphony tours were used to test infrasonic frequencies on large audiences to see if specific moods, like compliance or panic, could be broadcasted through a live orchestra. Proponents of this theory point to the unusual number of mass hysteria events recorded at Western-sponsored concerts in Eastern Europe during the late 1950s as evidence of these acoustic experiments. Was AEJIG a success? Tactically, it was a masterpiece of deep cover funding. The agency successfully operated for nearly 2 decades before the public became aware of the connection. Tactically, the pass-through architecture was so resilient that even when magazines like Encounter were exposed, the underlying recruitment networks remained intact. The CIA learned how to weaponize the independent intellectual, turning people who were naturally skeptical of government into the state's most effective defenders. This tactical win meant the CIA didn't need to build its own propaganda machine. It simply bought the one that already existed. Strategically, it won the battle of intellectuals. By the 1970s, the Soviet model of state-mandated art had lost all credibility among the world's elite, largely thanks to the vibrant CIA-funded alternative. Strategically, AEJIG decoupled progressive thinking from pro-Soviet policy, ensuring that the global avant-garde remained firmly within the Western orbit. This prevented the USSR from capturing the moral high ground in the Third World and among European youth. The strategic legacy of AEJIG is the total dominance of Western liberal values and the global cultural marketplace. A victory so complete that we often forget it was ever a contested battlefield. As far as operational and technological breakthroughs go, pass through philanthropy architecture. The CIA perfected the use of legitimate-looking nonprofits and shell foundations to move millions of dollars across borders without triggering banking alarms. This is now the standard financial backbone for non-governmental organizations and dark money groups used by the intelligence community to fund pro-democracy movements, digital activists, and civil society initiatives and closed societies today. It allows for the funding of foreign political parties under the guise of democratic outreach. Network-centric social engineering and influencer mapping. AEJIG developed the Salon method of identifying the key opinion leaders and surrounding them with unwitting influencers to steer their public statements. This methodology is the direct ancestor of modern influencer operations used by the State Department and the intelligence community on social media platforms. Intelligence agencies now use AI to map social graphs and deploy botnets on or paid influencers to shift public discourse in foreign nations during election cycles, replicating the AEJIG Salon on a digital scale. Acoustic and visual branding research. The agency researched how specific musical frequencies, lighting, and visual patterns could induce feelings of openness, trust, or anxiety in a controlled environment. This research evolved into modern neuromarketing and is utilized by military psychological operations teams to design broadcast content and digital ads that bypass critical thinking filters. It is currently being applied in the development of hyper-personalized propaganda that uses eye tracking and biometrics to adjust content in real time to maximize user compliance. Targeted talent spotting in neutral, high-value environments. The use of international festivals, gala events, and academic conferences as safe zones for low-friction recruitment of foreign assets. This remains a primary tactic for the National Clandestine Service. Major international tech conferences and global summits are now the AEJIG-style hunting grounds, where case officers identify the next generation of scientific, tech, and political assets in an environment where networking is the expected behavior. The AEJIG project proves that in the shadow of war, even a gala dinner is a combat zone. The Velvet Trap was so successful because it utilized the one thing people never suspect of being a weapon: their own taste in art. When we look at the legacy of this project, we see the blueprint for how the modern world is managed, not through force, but through the subtle curation of our reality. The agency proved that if you control the stage, the actors will follow, even if they think they are improvising their own lines. The echoes of AEJIG are everywhere in our modern attention economy. We live in a world where the line between content and intelligence operation has been permanently erased. The techniques developed in the smoky salons of 1950s Paris have been uploaded into the algorithms that dictate what we see, what we hear, and ultimately what we believe. Every viral movement, every sponsored cultural shift, and every grassroots digital uprising carries the DNA of AEJIG. The agency didn't just fund art, they discovered that culture is the ultimate operating system for the human mind. By hacking that system, they ensured that the American narrative would become the default setting for the entire globe. As you leave this theater and walk back into the real world, ask yourself, who curated the music you're listening to? Who funded the artist whose work is on your wall? And most importantly, whose interests are served by the things you love? The velvet trap never truly closed, it just expanded until it became the world we live in. Thanks for listening. Keep your eyes on the stage and your ears on the subtext. Always verify your funding, secure your social circles, and remember, if the free expression feels too perfect, someone might be paying for the paint. Join us next time as we examine K.U. Wolf, the regional front, the late Cold War. When diplomacy fails and the jungle begins to speak, the CIA unleashes its most aggressive answer. We'll uncover the brutal efficiency of K.U. Wolf, the secret counterterrorism doctrine that created elite, deniable units to hunt regional insurgents in the dark corners of the globe. It's a story of unconventional warfare and targeted attrition where the rules of engagement are written in lead. Join us next time for The Night Stalkers. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.